Synchronous Solutions has been around for about 25 years now, working in the countertop industry. Um, my son Mark and I bought the company a year ago in January and are excited to be really working closely with ActionFlow and helping them or supporting them, I guess, in the application of T-dollars in their software. We believe T-dollars is the most important metric in your business, and hopefully at the end of today's session, you'll understand why. I'd like to start with a little bit more about my business, starting with our core beliefs, because these are key to how we approach business and how we help our clients. So our core beliefs are as follows. People are fundamentally good. Every conflict can be resolved. There's always a win-win solution. I'll come back to that later. Every situation, no matter how complex it initially looks, is exceedingly simple, and every situation can be substantially improved. And these are the basis of how we do business. And how we do business has a lot to do with the logic, science, and mathematics that underpin every business. Today, we're going to really emphasize the fourth core belief here, that every situation, no matter how complex it initially looks, is exceedingly simple. And we'll be kind of leveraging that as we go forward here, starting with a picture of a fabricating shop. Now, if you unmute yourselves and ask questions as we go. Otherwise, it's going to be a very short presentation. But the idea of your business is you've got revenue coming in one end and profits going out. And the goal of the business, basically, you can word it different ways, is to maximize the conversion of revenue into profits. And so this process of maximizing profits can get clouded and confused by how you view your business. And so what I'd like to do is present my way of looking at the piping of how money flows through a business to try and make this as simple and straightforward as we possibly can. And so here you go. This is how every business makes money. I believe in keeping it simple, so my explanations of how a business makes money consists of a funnel on one end, that's your sales funnel, and a spigot and a bucket. Okay? And I use this presentation or this visual presentation of how a business makes money over and over again. There are some minor ways to make it more complicated, but fundamentally, every business boils down to this picture or some slight variant of it. Right? And so you'll notice as revenue comes into your business, there's an immediate T. Not all of the money stays in your business. Some of it exits. And that's the material that goes to your suppliers. And across the industry, the percentage of revenue that is spent on materials averages somewhere around 35%, right? And I've seen it as low as 20% and as high as 51%, right? But on average, it's 35%. Now, what can you do with that number? Well, first thing you can do is calculate what percentage of the money stays in the business. And in this case, on average, it's about 65%. And we call this money that stays in the business your throughput dollars. And throughput dollars are what we use to pay the monthly bucket of bills. I believe every business that's represented here today has a bucket of bills, right? And every month, darn it, the bucket gets refilled with monies that we owe, and we have to bring in new $T to fill that bucket and overflow that bucket and make profits. Right? And that's it. This is how a business makes money. And so, what can we do with this? Right? Well, we can put a flow meter on the business, right? And if we put a flow meter on there and we measure $T per day, what could we do with that number? And I'm going to try and get over to the group, see if I can see people. Can you still see that screen?
Yep.
Yep. Okay, good. Because I can't now.
Okay.
All right. So if we're monitoring $T coming into our business, so what? What can we do with that? Apparently not much, huh? If you're speaking, you're muted. Let me ask a question. Who here monitors $T in their business? Anybody?
We're monitoring
Roderick
it,
does, okay.
and we
Mike?
can, if we can monitor it, we can maximize it.
If you monitor it, you can maximize it. All right, cool. So what does that do for you?
Makes me more profitable.
Makes you more profitable, right? All right. And so is everybody here on the call monitoring their $T coming in? If not, it might be a really good thing to do, right? We measure our business. We have a small consulting firm, about 10 strong, and we monitor every day and every week the $T that come into our business, right? And know whether we're going to make payroll each month or pay all our bills or invest in marketing, so on and so forth. So knowing those $T is kind of a critical aspect of your business. Thank you, Mike, for sharing. So we could take the one big bucket that represents all the bills and divide it into 20, 21, 22, 23 buckets in a month, right? The least number of days in a month is 20, and that's on some Februaries, and the most number of days is 23, which usually hits around August and March. So how many of you know how big your bucket needs to be each day to cover all your bills and fill your profit bag? Does anybody know that number?
I know that
Yes.
number.
You people, right? Kind of a key number to know, right?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. So if you don't know the $T that you need every day, you're just flying blind. And those of you who fly blind, which most businesses start out flying blind, they have to wait till they get their financial statement. Usually 2-3 weeks into the month, and then they realize, oh man, I had a lousy month, or I had a great month. But if it's a lousy month, what can you do about it 3 weeks into the next month?
Not much.
Not a heck of a lot, right? So you can look at that and say, well, that sucks. We better do better next time. And of course, next time you're at least halfway through next time, right? Because the month is mostly behind you. And so that's kind of a damn unfortunate situation. And so if we look at it, our business as these small buckets, we can actually know, well, if we want a certain amount of profits, given the bucket size, that's going to happen on the 19th and the 20th day of the month. Do you make any money on the first 18 days?
No.
No, there's no profits, right?
No.
And yet, I bet everybody on this call thinks about the profit margin of a job, right? Hey, we're just kind of programmed that way. Well, I think I'm going to make a lot of money on this job. or I'm not going to make much money on this job. And the reality is, that's not what matters. It matters to a degree, but what really matters is, are you flowing the T dollars through your business at the rate that's going to fill all these buckets and let the last day, 2 days, 3 days, 4 days, 5 days overflow into your profits? We have clients that pay all their bills by the 15th working day of the month, and all the rest is gravy. How awesome is that, right? They know they're doing that, and they intentionally do that. Heck, we have some right now that are probably finishing up around day 13. And so knowing your T dollars per day required to fill the bucket and overflow it to the profits you want is, well, in my mind, the most important measure you could possibly have in your business. All right. So in this scenario, when you actually know this information, what could we tell about day one on day two? What could we know about our financial situation after the first day of the month?
We would know if we're meeting our goal on that first day of the month.
Right. So we could look at that bucket and say, well, we didn't quite fill it. If we didn't quite fill it, what does that mean?
It means
You
we
gotta
have to
make
have,
up for it on the second day.
Yeah, you're going to have to make up for it. And if you don't make up for it, which bucket's not going to have much in it?
19 and 20.
19 and 20, right? And so you don't have to wait. When you monitor and understand T dollars, you don't have to wait for your financial statement, right? Every day, that target T dollars can tell you for the day whether you were ahead or behind. And if you accumulate day by day by day, and you're looking at T dollars month to date versus T dollars expected month to date, you know exactly where you are. You know it on day one, you know it on day two, you know it on week 2, week 3, you know it every single day. You don't have to wonder and hope and pray that your business is making money. You can explicitly know it. And if you know you haven't done well on the first week, you still have time to correct and make a difference. All right. So T dollars per day is the first measure of using throughput dollars that we teach our clients to use. Right? Any questions about T dollars per day? Just unmute yourself and blurt it out, because I can't see anybody except
Rick,
Steve. Steve, I see you. Go ahead.
Rick, this is Roderick. If a person or a company didn't really have a good idea today what their T dollars daily should be, what would you suggest for them how to come up with a number while they crunch through their numbers to come up with a point of a goal that they want to achieve every day? What would you suggest?
Great question, Roderick. Let me go back a slide. So we start with looking at the monthly bucket of bills. And what we know from working with lots and lots of businesses, that the monthly bucket of bills, unless you have lumpy payments in how you pay your taxes and other things, the monthly bucket of bills is fundamentally stable. It doesn't change a whole lot. Month to month, there's a little bit of variation, but it's fairly stable. So the first thing you would do is you would take 6, 8, 10, 12, 2 years worth of however many P&Ls you have, and look at what your expenses are. And by the expenses, I mean all the money you spent converting materials into business, all the dollars that aren't sent to your suppliers, right? All of that OE is in there. So the bucket of bills includes your direct labor. The only correction you need to make usually in your financial statement is in the cost of goods sold. The cost of goods sold, to do your analysis of your business this way, simply consists of material costs. So you're talking about slabs, sinks, corbels, just the materials you buy from a supplier. Some businesses where you have contracted out all of your install crews, that would also be money leaving your business. And so your monthly bucket of bills would not include them because they would be truly variable expense. They're expenses that when you sell a job, you're going to incur. And if you don't sell a job, you're not going to incur. All right, so the first step to figure out what your little bucket needs to be is to figure out what your big bucket is. Right? And what we add to the big bucket is the little sack of profits. So if you know your monthly bucket of bills and you know how much profit you want to make in a month, you can add those two numbers together, together, divide it by however many days in the month, or what I prefer to do is just divide it by 21 and or 20 and be really conservative, and every bucket has to have 1/20th of the typical operating expense and 1/20th of the profits. And that's how I determine a profit size, bucket size. Does that make sense?
Yeah, just one clarification. So you would never include shop supplies, polishing pads, or anything like that that is required. You're simply subtracting the materials, sinks, maybe adhesive if that's included as to what you
Sure.
sell, but your consumables are not really considered part of the expense that comes up with your T dollars. Those would go into the calculation of buckets 1 through 20.
Yes, and I would not fight real hard to maintain that. If somebody insisted that they think that's TVE, it's excuse the pun here, a drop in the bucket, right? And so,
Okay.
yeah, so anyone who's worked with me knows I'm not a quibbler. And so this is not, I mean, the OE is going to vary. As long as you're consistent in how you look at things, the analysis and the thinking and the insights you get from this process aren't significantly influenced by whether minor expenses are here or there. So
How would you classify if you had 2/3 of your installers were contractors and a third was employees? How would you evaluate that as far as calculating T dollars per day?
now that's another great question, Roderick. So again, my bias, and this is my impression, my opinion, is I would just convert, I would say every installer is an in-house installer. And that's just to keep it simple. I'm a simple guy. I like simple answers. And so if you have in-house installers, treat everybody as in-house installers. Erring that way will be more conservative than erring the other way. And
That's
so I
typically
tend to err on the conservative side.
That's typically how I thought of it as well. And it's also not a large variable. In other words, you typically have your contractors with you all the time. So thanks, Rick.
I'm actually surprised that more people don't get in trouble with the IRS on the contractors, because many businesses subcontract their installs, and they're the only customer that those contractors work for, and the IRS can come at some point in the future and say, well, actually, they were employees, and if that happens, everybody in the process is pretty well screwed. So if you're doing that, be careful. Great questions. Any other questions from the group? All right. In that case, let's move forward.
I did have one quick question.
Okay, please.
Why would you include the 1099 employees if they're not going to be considered in your operating if they're paid by the square foot and not factored into
Oh,
the
that's a great
cost?
question. So if they're paid by the square foot, if kind of the ideal way to do it is put everybody into square foot pay, but that's not typically what happens. Again, I would want to look at it in a way that would be conservative, so that as you do your analysis, it you tend to make conservative estimates. So, but if you technically, what you're paying by the square foot is truly TVE. So again, I wouldn't quibble with you. It's just a matter of why are we doing this analysis and what are we trying to learn from it? So you're not wrong, Chase.
Do you have a chart that creates this analysis, or what's the best way to break that down if you don't have a system already in place?
Well, buy ActionFlow if you haven't already. I'm assuming you're on this call, so you probably have it, right? One of the reasons we really like ActionFlow and the team at ActionFlow is they've implemented T-dollars very effectively, and some of the advanced concept we're about to step into. But you need to know the T-dollars for the job, and you need to know your OE bucket size. Your OE bucket size comes out of your financials. So between what's in ActionFlow and what's in your P&L, you have all the information you need. That and a calculator, and you're good to go. Nothing that we do at Synchronous Solutions is particularly complex. It's just not easy. Right? The math is simple. The logic is simple and straightforward. It's not easy to bend your mind around this way of looking at your business. But this diagram pretty much it doesn't get a whole heck of a lot more complicated than this. Great question, though. Thanks, Chase. Anyone else? All right. So we've looked at having our flow meter at the input of our revenue pipe or our T-dollars pipe. And that gives us some really important insights that can be used to make sure on a day-to-day basis we're scheduling and installing enough work to meet the financial needs of the business. And that's the first action we take when we engage with you as a client. Make sure that flow meter's in there and you're scheduling full buckets every day, or as full as you possibly can, without exceeding the capacity of what limits your production process, be it machinery or people. But the most interesting measure is when you move that flow meter and you park it at the constraint. Every process, every business, every system, doesn't matter what it is, has a weakest link or a pinch point. Right? That's the science behind what we do. Physics, science says every process that's in series, one of them is going to be the weakest link. And you want to understand where that weakest link is, or that thinnest point in your pipe is, and take advantage of it. More than just identifying where it is, you actually want to decide where it should be. Because if this is the pinch point in your business that's limiting your business's ability to make money, there are places where it makes a lot of sense to have it, and there are places where it makes no sense to have it. So let's start with the obvious. If you had a business and you had a pinch point in it and it was in material handling, would that make any sense? Hopefully everybody's in there saying, "Oh, no, that would make no sense at all," right? So if your idea of your business is to maximize your return on your investment, if you're the business owner and you're investing in this business to improve the value of the business and your lifestyle and your what you're able to do for your employees, then you want that pinch point to be somewhere that makes sense. In most shops, it's with the machinery, and it's either in the saw, and that would be typical if you do a lot of miter work, or it's at the CNC if you don't do a lot of micro, do a lot of flat work. And there are other places it can be, and you could have both, in which case this diagram gets slightly more complicated because we would treat them as two separate streams with two separate spigots, each managed independently, but managed the same way we're going to describe in general here. All right. So moving the flow meter to your constraint, your limiting process, is the second measure. And we call this measure octane, and it's T dollars per constraint minute. Let me let you reflect on that for a second. T dollars per constraint minute. So when we had the meter back there, we were monitoring all the work going through the shop, right? So if you have multiple machines, multiple paths through the shop, this flow meter right here is monitoring the complete volume of the business coming into the shop. Does this make sense? All right, when we move the meter down here, now we're looking at a specific piece of machinery. And if you have multiple pieces of machinery, question? Okay. If you have multiple pieces of machinery, now we're looking at it at the machine level, right? And when we talk about constraint minutes, we're talking about the time to process a job through that point. Any questions on this metric so far?
Just a point on constraint. Currently, you've identified fabrication constraint. However, there are some cases where it's prefabrication constraint, where your flow is restricted in the sales process or the validation of the job or the order, however you want to call that. And so I just wanted to point that out as being a constraint that may also influence this bucket.
That is absolutely true. In fact, there are, I talk in simple terms in terms of, we want to have a chosen constraint in production to optimize the business. But to Roderick's point, if you're a growing business, you would actually almost never be running your constraint at capacity, and therefore the actual constraint in the business will be upstream in the sales funnel over here somewhere, right? And in fact, that's the situation that most businesses find themselves in every winter, and almost every business found themselves in this past winter, right? Where there was not enough work flowing through the shop to fill the constraint. And hopefully that was recognized and they went back and looked at the constraint. And we're going to get to that here in just a second. Great point. Any other comments or questions about this metric octane so far? All right. In that case, we'll move forward. So first of all, octane is a number that relates to a specific job. Right? And every job will have a different octane. Does that make sense? Yep. All right. And the average flow rate, the T dollars per day, is really the sum of the flow rates of all the jobs that flowed through the shop. So it's the octane across all of the jobs that sets the overall throughput going into the system. Right? And so if every job has their own octane, is it likely that it's going to be the same? No, right? Every job's going to have its different, unique octane. How about markets? If you do home centers, do you think its octane would be different than retail on average? Certainly, right? And builders would probably have a characteristic octane. Same thing with designers, commercial work, and so on. And if octane is T dollars per constraint minute, and you had different octanes, what's the implication of that from the sales perspective? If you have a product mix and they each have their own characteristic octane, the average flow rate is a function of your product mix, right? So how does this come into play? Why is this important? What insights can you get from this thinking? Anybody?
If you maximize the high octane markets, you'll be more profitable.
Excellent. So if you leverage the higher octane ones, you'll become more profitable. Right? Your average flow rate will increase. If, on the other hand, you increase the lower end octane jobs, your average throughput rate will diminish. And it's literally averaging, so there's no complex math here, right? The implications of that can be huge for clients, right? Or for you. If you decide to take on a bunch more home centers, if you're not watching your capacity and the impact on it, you can actually squeeze out other work and lower the profitability, lower how much is going into this bag over here, right? Your profit bags. And that can be rather problematic, right? And so understanding what your octane is by markets gives you tremendous insights into how and where you want to market and grow your business. That's the first piece. Does that make sense? Any questions on that? All right. So in answer to Roderick's question earlier, or a point earlier where he said, well, actually, there's another constraint out there in sales. Yeah, that's usually the case because you're not wanting to run your business if you're growing. You're not going to be satisfied when you hit the capacity, and you're going to add some headroom. So if you had headroom in your business, like you did in January, I'm sure everyone on this call had some space where they weren't selling or filling their pipe. What is the flow rate of the work up here in this white space above the green bar? What T dollars per minute is that flowing at? Anybody? What's that? How about zero? Right? It's space, it's air. Your machine is idle. Your people are standing around, or more likely they've spread the work out to fill the day, right? But there's nothing flowing here. The octane of nothing going through your shop is zero. That makes sense? Who can think of a number bigger than zero?
Anything.
Any number that's not negative is bigger than zero, right? And if we're talking about T dollars, we're talking about the money above the cost of the materials, right? And so if you're charging anything more than the material cost and you have the capacity, how is that going to impact your bottom line if you take work that's, quote, unprofitable? Is it going to make your bottom line go up or go down?
Make you more profitable.
Yeah, it makes it more profitable, right? So when you have capacity, when you have production capacity that's not used, you have a huge opportunity. Right? As long as you don't impact your existing customer base, you have the opportunity to sell this gap, this gray that's flowing at zero. You have the opportunity to sell that at highly competitive rates, right? And by customers. If you have extra capacity and you have a builder you really, really want to work with, right? And you're in this situation where you have that gray space, you can be incredibly competitive to get that business, get them to try your services, right? How many people actually do that? Very few, right? And so this idea of the constraint and the flow rates and whether or not you're flowing at capacity has a huge impact on your business, right? The T dollars that we first talked about, T dollars per day, lets you see whether you're profitable or not. When you break it down into octane, it gives you the insights you need to compete in an ever increasingly competitive market. Does that make sense? Any questions about that?
Rick, the comment that says, but with what? It's been my experience that a lot of companies are so focused on margin and they'll crucify a salesperson for, going below a certain number. And here's an opportunity. If you really understand your T dollars and your octane, your T dollars constraint, but all this kind of good stuff, then you can, on a educated basis, you can make a pretty accurate assumption what the what is. And therefore you could look at jobs that are marginal, if you understand what I'm saying there, and make a decision that you're going to take that job. Even in the good times, it would not be one you would take, but when times are a little bit slow, you might venture, and even with your good clients, for instance, that give you an opportunity to take on a larger project or a larger job, and your sales team is focused on margin, and that's kind of their restriction, as opposed to, hey, we need to be a little bit more flexible here.
Yep. Yeah. So how is margin relevant? When is margin relevant?
Well, it's
Anybody?
relevant when you're at your constraint. If you're full at your constraint, then the higher margin work, the higher T dollar work is better. But if you're not filling your constraint, any work is good.
Right. And to clarify a little bit, sounds like Mike there. It's not just T dollars, right? It's octane. It's T dollars per constraint minute. I want you to think about this statement. The only measure of relative profitability of jobs or markets is octane. The only relative measure of profitability is octane. Anyone want to challenge that? Pretty brash statement. Because octane has absolutely freaking nothing to do with margin, right?
Hey, can I ask you to clarify something again?
Please.
This is, it's very interesting. So I've been taking notes. Can you define octane as you're using it again? I'm sorry if I missed that.
Okay, no, it's on the, well, I think it's on the screen right now. It's on my screen. It says T dollars divided by constraint minute. So T dollars is revenue minus the material cost for the job, and constraint minute is how many minutes it took through your limiting process. So if your limiting process was your CNCs, then it would be T dollars divided by how many minutes of CNC time it consumed. And that would include processing time and changeover time.
So my problem right now is what the gentleman had said earlier. My problem right now is we don't have the sales coming in. My capacity is higher. So I have a lot of gray space.
Yep.
So I don't know how to, I don't know how to see where my constraint minute would be, because my constraint isn't my saw or my CNC. It's
right.
Well, I guess eventually it would be. That would be the first thing that filled up.
Yep. And so the that's actually a great question, Steve. Thank you for pointing that out. So the constraint, as I stated in the beginning in production, and as Roderick corrected and said, well, Yeah, but it's usually in sales. That is absolutely true statements. So what you're looking to do here is to simplify how you think about your business by proactively designing your process around a constraint. So I prefer to choose the equipment or where you have the most capital tied up in equipment, which is why it's typically the CNCs if you're heavy on flat work, right? So if you have most of your capital in CNCs and you want to leverage the return on that, then you would basically declare CNCs your constraint. And that gives you a focusing mechanism for figuring out and having a reference point for where it is. Now, if you're a growing business, how often are you going to let those CNCs be your constraint? No, you'll increase. I'm going to go backwards here, maybe. Yep. So you increase your market share and you fill up the pipe, right? And then you go out, whoops, and you buy another CNC and you increase it, and now you have a little more capacity, and boom, you're out there being competitive, grabbing more business, and you're ratcheting your capacity up. So the reality is your chosen constraint is rarely your actual constraint. But that's okay. It allows you to simplify your business down and actually understand the business and relative profitability and interesting things like that. Does that help, Steve? I'll take that as a yes. You're muted.
Also, remember, a constraint can also be your human resources. So far we've been focused on equipment or sales, the pipeline, but the other one that is quite often the case is your human resources.
Yeah, there are many, many different kinds of constraints. There are physical constraints, which is what we're talking about. There are people constraints. There are policy constraints. You can have a policy constraint because you have a dumb policy to not do something. Good dumb policy constraint is you don't sell any jobs with less than a 62% margin. That would be a policy constraint. That would be shooting yourself in the foot because it makes no sense if you understand how a business actually makes money. So that would be a policy constraint. Most businesses, when we start working with them, have a mindset constraint. And what's limiting the business, what's limiting the ability of the business to make money is located in the 6 inches between their ears. Right? It's how they think about their business. It's the fact that margin rules and it's sacred and it's absolute nonsense. And so beliefs about your business as a business owner is the first constraint. And later on will probably become another constraint as well. The way most people run their businesses gets beat into you and you acquiesce. So understanding how to simplify your business, what we're all about. And this is the most simple model that actually is correct model. So
yeah. Hey, Rick, let me jump in here and just for everyone, you know, I've been through this many, many times. And I'm still like right here today trying to think through some of these questions that are being asked. So I mean, for me, I'm trying to figure out how to really get a grasp on it that I can navigate through all these questions clearly. But one thing that I think has been helpful for me is I think of hoses, like, you know, your garden hose or a fire hose. You know, so there's different diameters that allow water to flow through there.
Correct.
And the problem is like your kind of intuitive thing is like to think of square footage of like you think of a quantity of jobs you're getting done, and you know maybe the intuitive way to think of that is the square footage. So you could have like if And so the water, the question is, what metric should we be measuring? And with hoses, you're measuring water, but the thing to realize, like if you're measuring square footage, you might have these two hoses that are each putting the same amount, so they're the same diameter by the metric of square footage. But like if you were like the retail, if you were measuring $T versus home center, the retail in terms of the amount of $T it's going through might be a lot more $T. And so here you have a fire hose of $T versus a garden hose of $T on the home center, but the square footage might be the same. So,
yeah, well, let me clarify one thing about the fire hose and the garden hose. It's the pressure behind the hose, right? So it's the flow rate through the hose.
Well, that's true.
Based on the nozzle side, that really matters.
Well, yeah, I mean, so the analogies kind of break down. You could have like lots of pressure through a fire for a garden hose and not so much through a fire hose. But if the what I'm trying to get at is the measure, a metric of $T might be different than the metric of square footage, and I'm thinking of diameters to measure that, but it's the metric that's being measured that you want to know. And so it's how much is flowing through, but it's not just how much. Is it are you measure, is it water, is it $T, is it square feet? And the key thing is to make that switch and to start thinking of the $T that are flowing through, and that's what you want to maximize. But if your fire hose, I mean, obviously you'd rather have a fire hose and fill up your bucket with a fire hose. But if your fire hose, you only have, like Steve was kind of saying, you only have enough sales on your fire hose for 5 days a month. I mean, I fill it up with 5 days, but then you aren't just going to stop filling your bucket. Then maybe you have to go to your water hose. Like, let's get all we can out of the fire hose and then go to our water hose because we still need to keep filling things up.
Reese, one of my problems here too is it is interesting. I put a high value on margin, and like just talking through this, I could see how that actually is impacting the $T because I'm putting too high of an emphasis on some of that margin.
Yeah. You know what, Steve, what's interesting, and this would be worth you going back and calculating, but your high margin jobs may have low octane. So you may have jobs that you think you're making a lot of money on that is actually flowing slower through your shop, so you're making less money. In fact, I would be shocked if that wasn't the case.
I think one takeaway from this whole session, Rick, is I think this opens a door for owners and managers to walk away from this session today and define in writing in front of them what they view their constraints to be. Mm-hmm. Because ultimately, you're going to need to know how to manage your constraints. So you think you're managing people and human resources and all these other things that you have to manage. But ultimately, what we're learning today is we need to manage our constraints and understand where they are and how to address them.
Exactly. And going back to our core beliefs, every situation could be substantially improved. Understanding your configuration of your business and how to substantially improve it is key. And I've also highlighted the third core belief. There's always a win-win solution. A lot of smaller shops and folks don't believe they can afford our services. But with a core belief that there's always a win-win solution, don't hesitate to reach out and contact us, because when we say we're looking for a win-win solution, that means we are looking at how to put more revenue on your bottom line than you're spending on our services. And that's exactly what we do. And so if you would like to know more about this and how to apply it to your business, there's 3 options here. You can schedule a call, you can sign up for a newsletter, or you can visit our website. We would be delighted to work with each and every one of you. And I think we might have, looking at the clock on your thing, it says 59 minutes, but I think we still have a few minutes left.
We still have a
for
few
questions.
minutes. Yep.
So I jumped to the end because I thought we had 15 seconds left here.
Yeah, sorry.
Any other questions?
So Rick, I'd like to say one thing we've been going through the Synchronous Solutions process for just about a year now, not quite. And I've appreciated how ActionFlow is working with you on that to provide the tools, whether it's through tracking T-dollars. There's more work we have to do in our constraint and recognizing our constraint, and then finding our octane for each item. But the tools are there within ActionFlow to do it. We may need a little more help working on that, but that's for all those out there that have ActionFlow but aren't using Synchronous Solutions. That's the nice part about this partnership. There is that the tools are there.
Yep. And in fact, Octane, Synchronous Flow, at least at this point in time, is the only software that has implemented Octane.
Yeah.
The only software that can actually give you the information you need to know to understand the relative profitability of your jobs and your markets. That, my friends, is huge. Absolutely huge. And why our collaboration with ActionFlow is such an important element to us. And I'll expand that. It's our collaboration with ActionFlow and Fabricator's Choice. We're three legs of a three-legged stool that are critical to each other. And it has been an amazing working relationship over the last 16 months, 18 months that we've had this business. So we're very thrilled to call ourselves a partner and a platinum sponsor of ActionFlow. We'll be at Blasius, with Mike and his team in a few weeks. Look forward to meeting you all there. And as always, we love working with Roderick and Audrey and the rest of his team.
Thank you, Rick. And yeah, the feeling is mutual. I've learned a ton from you and yeah, Roderick and Mike, thank you. I'm looking forward to being up at your place. So yeah, it's fun to collaborate and move things forward.
The link is now in the chat. I think it didn't get posted there earlier. So for that event that they're referencing, all the information is there. If you have any questions, my email address is there as well. But yeah, love for you to check it out. Any closing comments before I close it out here, Rick? Good.
Any closing questions?
Presentation, Rick, thanks.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Hopefully it's got some folks thinking differently or at least concerned and wanting to go look at some numbers here.
Could I ask one question real quick?
Sure.
So if I think I have a general understanding of the T-dollars and the octane and everything. So if you're looking at, you're taking jobs as they come, whether it be like a retail or a builder, whatever it might be, and you're scheduling the jobs, getting them through the shop. So once you start to understand T-dollars and octane, I guess, is there any kind of example or a little bit better understand, like, would you change your scheduling based on that understanding, or, the way you put those jobs through the shop? Or is it more, you understand, I guess, what customers have a, maybe higher percentage octane or, higher octane. So is it more going after trying to target those customers?
All right. It's a fantastic question, Steve. And actually it's extremely relevant. It's a point that did not make during this presentation, but should have. So if you think about that pinch point, I'm going to go back to the diagram here. If you think about that pinch point right there, that flow rate that's going through there, what happens if you try and put more through this pipe than you can handle? What happens
You'll have-
with a storm sewer when it rains really hard and the pipe can't handle it?
You'll have a backup.
Yeah, it backs up and it floods and it creates all kinds of havoc, right? And so the goal of the business is to operate as close to the capacity of the constraining process as possible without exceeding it, right? And when we look at octane, we're talking about constraint minutes, right? And so built inside of ActionFlow is the way to calculate constraint minutes for a job, which gives us the divided by $, and you have octane, which is relative profitability, right? But if you have constraint minutes for every single job, kind of nirvana and where we're heading with our clients, with recent companies' help, is to accumulate those constraint minutes and schedule the constraint based on minutes, not based on $, and certainly not based on square feet. And by the way, constraint minutes on either machine is based on linear inches, not square feet. And so the metric that's most important in this industry is linear inches that you're processing, whether it's be on your saw or on your CNCs. And so that's a really cool metric because actually it's fairly easy to calculate what it is because that's what your program does. It tells how long it's going to take to machine those parts. So constraint minutes is the ultimate metric that you're using to schedule your shop as close to capacity as possible. Did that make sense, Stephen, as an answer?
Yes, absolutely. Makes a lot of sense. Thank you.
Certainly. And so if you really want to be ahead of the curve, get octane going and start understanding in, first of all, how many constraint minutes you have, what you can do to get more, and schedule to that amount and no more.
Rick, there's one more constraint I think that needs to be taken into consideration, because one thing I've experienced is we get so focused on these numbers that we start pushing jobs through. We want to make sure that our remake, redo levels don't increase as a result of that, because that will directly impact your constraint at a whole different level. So you want to be able to manage your throughput and your volume going through without impeding the quality of your jobs, so that you're not just driven by the $, and jobs are being forced through, and then your remakes and redo levels are really high. So just watch that as well.
No, absolutely. And if you recut a job, what is its $?
Negative.
It's negative the material cost, right? So if instead of rolling or flowing at a $, rate of somewhere in the neighborhood of $25 a minute, now you're running a negative dollars per minute. And that has a profound impact on the profitability of your business. So you're absolutely right. You'd never do anything at the expense. I mean, what you're going to want to do is think about how all these numbers relate and connect all the dots. And that's what we do when we work with our clients and we get them into their operating strategy. So how do you operate every single step of your process so that it is correct in its relationship to the constraints in your business? And that's plural constraints. Great point. Thanks, Roderick.
Other questions?
Well, there's still some people here now that I'm back seeing everybody. Thank you guys for spending your morning or lunchtime with us, and hopefully it was worth your time.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Rick, and
Rick.
everybody else.
Thank you.
That was great.
Yep.